Hello and welcome to Kindred Spirits Book Club, the podcast where two grown-ass ladies geek out about Anne of Green Gables. I'm Kelly Gerner, and I'm joined by my co-host Ragon Duffy. It's just the two of us today, Ragon.
I know, Kelly. It feels kind of weird now. We're back to just being just the two of us.
So it's been a minute since we talked about what we're reading. Let's do a little spring reading check-in. How are you doing on your goals this year?
Well, I started off really strong in January and February, but I'm going to say that March has not been a strong reading month for me. So I got to do some catching up, but we've got spring break coming up. So maybe I'll get some good reading time in then.
Oh, for sure you will. I have to say that I love that Novelly Yours reading tracker that you mentioned on the pod. It has been so fun because it doesn't just keep track of title and author, it also encourages you to notice and track trends in the genres you're reading or in the format you're reading, whether you're reading a physical book or an e-reader or an audiobook. And one thing I noticed that I was kind of surprised by is I've been reading a ton of more audiobooks this year than I normally would.
Yeah, I really like that about it too. I like noting the genre. And one of the things I noticed was apparently early this year, I was just really deep into mysteries. I don't tend to think of myself as a prolific mystery reader. So I don't know what was happening with me that I got there. The other thing that has been good for me was because it encourages you to keep track of where you got it, like what format you're reading it in.
Yes.
And where you got it, it's kind of encouraging me not to buy more books, like to use
Same.
my library, to use borrowing from other people or little free libraries in my neighborhood, and things like that. That's sort of been a little bit of, oh, look at all these great other ways I have to get books. And there is one about like keeping track on how much you spend on books where I was like,
Yes.
yeah, no, it feels good to kind of just remind myself that as rich as it makes me feel to own a lot of books, I don't have to buy all of them, except I'm realizing right now as we are talking about it, you know what I have not been tracking in that book is vintage copies of Anne of Green Gables that I have been buying for our Instagram account. So
I think
don't,
that's separate.
that's separate.
That's in a separate category of spending in my
That's
mind.
a separate category of spending because
Podcast related expenses.
it's not like there are ones like, oh, I have to put now they're on my TBR, right? But now I own like 6 copies of Anne's House of Dreams because all of the covers are so pretty.
They're so pretty. Well, and I think that's an interesting way to think about book ownership generally. Like there's kind of two ways to do it. Either you buy books because they sound fun and then they hang out on your shelf till you get time to read them, which is I think kind of what I've been doing up to now.
Yeah.
Or there's this kind of idea that I think I'm starting to grow into a little bit more, which is if I read a book and I love it and I really feel like Anne and Gilbert say in Anne's House of Dreams, we don't have a huge bookshelf, but every single one of our books is a friend. So when you have those books in your life that you know are your friends and you want to live with them on your shelves, those are the books you do buy. And you buy them in beautiful editions and you buy them in hardcover and they live on your shelves as friends, as opposed to just like, I had no impulse control at the bookstore and like came home with a stack of paperbacks that maybe I'll, plow through this summer. We'll see.
I know.
Oh my gosh. Well, Reagan, what are you reading?
So as I said, I've been a little bit in a reading slump, but I'm just starting a book called The Eyes and the Impossible by Dave Eggers. And it's a middle grade book and it just won the Newbery Award. So I'm hoping to discuss it soon with another friend. We've been talking about reading some middle grade books together. It's from the viewpoint of a stray dog, a free dog who lives in a park observing everything. He's the eyes. And he reports it all back to the 3 bison who are the keepers of the equilibrium. And that's all I know so far. I'm just starting it. I also just finished reading the book. This is a book I read out loud to Alice, and it's called The Swifts, A Dictionary of Scoundrels. And it's by Beth Lincoln. And if you liked A Series of Unfortunate Events or the Myrtle Hardcastle mystery books that I talked about a few weeks ago, you will love this. It's this huge, sprawling, extended family. The conceit is when each person is born, they are named by the new mother opening a dictionary at random and blindly pointing to a word. And then this is supposed to be kind of like a form of destiny, and everyone is assumed to live up to their name. So our main character is Shenanigan Swift.
Fabulous.
So like great vocabulary builder of a book.
Oh, yeah.
So, and we follow her through this huge family reunion that happens every couple of years where the family convenes on this big old house and there's supposed to be a buried treasure.
Ooh.
So we follow her through the family reunion. She's hunting for treasure and then she's working to solve a murder with her sisters, Phenomena and Felicity, and her uncle Maelstrom, and various assorted cousins. It's very fun.
Absolutely excellent. So I just finished the newest and unfortunately, I think the last Veronica Speedwell mystery. Uh,
No.
I know it's called A Grave Robbery by Deanna Raybourn.
It's the last one. I love Veronica Speedwell.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think so, especially the way it ended. Like it very
Mm,
much sort of tying things up in a bow. And I was like, oh, I think I had heard that she was winding the series down. Oh, I love this series so much. Like I'm genuinely heartbroken. And so I think we may have recommended this series before on the pod. I know we're both huge fans. Maybe we just kind of brought it up in passing, but it is still well worth encouraging you all to check out. Let's see. It is a historical mystery series set in Victorian era London, so right up my alley. And the detectives are both what we would think of as biologists, but they call themselves natural philosophers. In particular, our heroine, Veronica Speedwell, is a butterfly researcher, or a lepidopterist, as she calls herself. They are constantly finding themselves in the middle of wild adventures involving inconvenient corpses.
I mean, is there ever a convenient corpse?
That's a good point. It's a good point. And Deanna Raybourn, the author, she just created such a fun sandbox for them to play in. Super fun series, so many of my favorite themes and tropes, very gothic, lots of secrets. And then the main characters have just absolutely tremendous chemistry. A bit of like a push-pull, reluctant colleagues to lovers arc that happens very slowly over the course of the series. And so the first book in the series is called A Curious Beginning. My favorite is the fourth book, which is A Perilous Undertaking. And then the most recent one, of course, is A Grave Robbery.
Yes, 100% agree with this. This is one of my favorite series. I just love it. But changing the topic, we are going to move into our episode. Today we're going to tie up some loose ends in Anne's House of Dreams. We've really dug deep into this book, and I think it's very much rewarded our close read. We've discussed the ways in which this book is uniquely emotionally mature among the Anne books. And to paraphrase Brenna, our guest on our last episode, the events of this book marks Anne's final stage of development from girlhood to womanhood. In Anne's House of Dreams, our favorite little redheaded girl is finally all grown up. She enjoys deep love and connection with her husband. She experiences terrible grief. She forges long-lasting friendships and community bonds. Today, we're going to talk about how all of those experiences are interconnected, how those formative times of intense emotionality unite our characters together and solidify connection. In Anne's House of Dreams, Anne's search for place is going to last the rest of her life. Four Winds is her forever home. It's a taller order making a home and putting down roots in the place where you will raise your family. And it follows that Anne's road to community is more intense.
Our kindred spirit for this episode is going to be the whole Four Winds friend group. So that's Gilbert and Anne, Captain Jim, Leslie, Miss Cornelia, and I am even going to include our satellite members, Marshall Elliott and Owen Ford.
You love Marshall Elliott.
I really do love Marshall Elliott. I'm not even shy to admit it.
I don't know whether I give him nearly as much thought as you do, but hey, I'm glad Marshall Elliott's got a total fan.
I think about him constantly and how handsome he must be underneath all his hair.
You know what? You love a man with a secret, just like Barney Snaith.
It's true. It's true. At any rate, over the course of this book, this little band of the race that knows Joseph deals with some moments of bliss, terrible times of tragedy, and some pretty astonishing twists of fate. This episode is all about braving the wilderness of life's biggest emotions, grief and regret and passion and hope, and finding connection in the process. The characters in this book show us how to support each other with gentle grace and compassion.
Captain Jim gives us our quote of the episode. He says, "There's a vast of ununderstandable things in life, ain't there, Mistress Blythe? Sometimes things seem to work out real proper like, same as with you and the doctor. And then again, they all seem to go catawampus." It's a deceptively simple line, and all the more humble spoken in Captain Jim's folksy dialect. But he manages to get right to the heart of this book. Our lives are unpredictable, and sometimes things seem to fall perfectly in place, and sometimes things seem to occur in the most painful way possible. We can't understand why it happens like that. It's ununderstandable, as Captain Jim says, a mystery. The best we can do is learn to enjoy the good moments and endure the terrible ones, knowing that neither is permanent.
For our story club, we want to talk about how community is one of the major themes in both the Anne series and in Ellen Montgomery's writing as a whole. It's safe to say that Maud was fascinated by communities. how they form, how we become part of one, who are the insiders and outsiders, and how we create communities of our own. Throughout our podcast, we've discussed how Anne begins as the ultimate outsider. She's a child of unknown parentage from a town far away. Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert don't know her family, her history, her religion. In the earliest moments of their meeting, Anne isn't even forthcoming about her name.
If only she could have convinced Marilla that her name really was Cordelia.
Right? The Cuthberts take Anne in on faith, Marilla trusting Providence, and Matthew wisely knowing that even if the friendless orphan girl was, quote, no good to them, they might be of some good to her. And that marks Anne's first steps into community. She's part of a family. In just a few years, Anne goes from ultimate Avonlea outsider to community leader. She's ambitious and driven and charismatic and earnest. And between teaching the Avonlea School and founding the Avonlea Village Improvement Society, she's become an indelible thread in the fabric of the village. While there will always be naysayers and critics, and of course, pies will be pies, by the time Anne leaves for Redmond, it's clear that she's an Avonlea girl through and through. Over the course of the Anne series, we learned that Anne doesn't just have a genius for friendship, she has a talent for community. She creates her own community of scholars at Patty's Place and Anne of the Island, and she wins over an entire town in Anne of Windy Poplars. By the start of Anne's House of Dreams, the reader can rest assured that wherever Anne and Gilbert decide to settle, Anne will make friends and find her place. Now, what's different and interesting about Anne's House of Dreams is that Anne doesn't find her way to community through like a series of scrapes, mishaps, and misunderstandings, right? There's no unfortunate lily maids in this book, no fireworks in the schoolhouse. There's no matchmaking unlikely couples or unruly sets of twins that need wrangling.
Not even any cannibalism.
I mean, and the book is poorer for it, let's face it.
Honestly, Captain Jim doesn't have one good cannibalism story.
Instead, what we do have is that Anne develops these lasting friendships and profound community connection through shared emotional experiences. So, we've discussed these major events throughout this season of the pod. The joy of Anne and Gilbert's wedding and their first home together contrasted with the tragedy of Leslie's life story, the gladness of capturing Captain Jim's adventuring story on the page, alongside with the sorrow in the loss of him, the devastating loss of Anne and Gilbert's first child, and the gentle solace of Captain Jim's experience with the grief of his lost love, the shock of Leslie's freedom, the joy of Leslie's happy ever after, and the birth of Jem, right alongside the sadness of leaving the House of Dreams behind. I mean, Ragon, other than maybe some of those Miss Cornelia moments, which are, usually played for comic relief, there is not a single low stakes moment in that whole list, right? I mean, it's just an emotional roller coaster, this book.
It really is. And you know what? As you said that, it made me think about the fact that Miss Cornelia is the comic relief, not Anne.
Right. Usually it's Anne. It's Anne's foibles and scrapes and silliness. And here, that's not Anne's journey. That's not what Anne is doing. That's not how she's creating connection and community. And so that task of comic relief, of sort of lightening some of these huge, heavy topics we're dealing with, falls to Miss Cornelia and some of her kind of outrageous speeches and stuff. And like, honestly, bless her for it. We need her in this book.
And of course, what's interesting about some of what her funny speeches are about is she's actually talking a lot about some of the tough things happening in towns.
Yeah.
She's talking about suicide. She's talking about people being abandoned. She's talking about families in poverty, but she's doing it in this very acerbic way that makes it slightly absurd.
Yeah, that's right. Even Miss Cornelia's sort of wry speeches are really hitting home on some of these like bigger issues as well.
So today we want to discuss why we think Maud goes in this direction. Why is it necessary for Anne to have these foundational experiences at the outset of her married life, her adult life, and her life in Four Winds?
I kind of think it might all come down to capital P Providence, Ragon. I kind of think it's this good old Calvinism just rearing its head.
Is that you, Kelly, or is that Marilla?
I don't know. She's taken over. But there does seem to be a balance, I would argue even a divine balance at play in this book. Look at all these contrasts. Anne experiences the greatest bliss of her life, marrying Gilbert, alongside her deepest grief, losing Joy. Leslie and Captain Jim also experience huge highs and huge lows in this book. And then, just look at Gilbert. This poor man. Within a year of his life, he finally has the girl of his dreams by his side, and then he nearly loses her. I mean, this is a book that is unafraid of darkness, unafraid to put its characters through it, but still profoundly bends toward resilience and strength and connection. I mean, surely Maud is reckoning on some level with how to weather the darkest storms while still keeping faith that things will turn out all right. And I think it's poignant to remember the most prominent symbol in this book is Captain Jim's lighthouse. What is a lighthouse but a beacon of hope in the middle of a dark sea?
And it's a direction to sail in.
Yes, yes, very much that.
If you know nothing else, you know which way the light is. So one thing we know is that this book was completed in October 1916, a little more than 2 years into Canada's involvement in World War I. So Maud likely would have been writing while receiving news reports from the Battle of the Somme, one of the deadliest battles in human history. In addition to that global trauma, as we discussed in our last episode, Maud also wrote House of Dreams in the wake of her own experience of losing her second son, Hugh Alexander. She was in a period of depression, writing in her journal, quote, "Everything feels dark and hopeless," and, quote, "This war is slowly killing me." With that context in mind, it makes sense that Anne's House of Dreams would not be just a simple, happy book full of amusing small town anecdotes and little misadventures. But we do see that Maud was unwilling to go too far into that darkness and instead wrote a book where grief exists alongside joy, where friendship and love grow stronger for having survived together. In the first chapter of House of Dreams, Diana and Anne are getting ready for Anne's wedding to Gilbert up in her room at Green Gables. It seems like Maud wanted to ground us in Anne's history before we embark on her future. Quote, "Anne's laugh, as blithe and irresistible as of yore, with an added note of sweetness and maturity, rang through the garret. Marilla, in the kitchen below, compounding blue plum preserve, heard it and smiled. Then sighed to think how seldom that dear laugh would echo through Green Gables in the years to come. Nothing in her life had ever given Marilla so much happiness as the knowledge that Anne was going to marry Gilbert Blythe. But every joy must bring with it its little shadow of sorrow." Marilla's reflection is one of the most consistent themes in House of Dreams. As happy as Anne and Gilbert are during these days before their wedding, this line is here to foreshadow what's to come, sorrow and joy together. And we remember how Anne once talked about each cup of glory having a taste of bitterness in it. That's echoed here in Marilla's sentiment.
Diana is also here in this scene to remind the readers of Anne's talent for community, not just through their lifelong friendship, but through Anne's impact on Avonlea with the AVIS. Anne calls Diana on the telephone to invite her over to Green Gables, and she says, "I can't realize that we really have telephones in Avonlea now. It sounds so preposterously up to date and modernish for this darling, leisurely old place." "We can thank the AVIS for them," said Diana. "We should never have got the line if they hadn't taken the matter up and carried it through." "I don't know that I'm wholly grateful to the AVIS in the matter of the telephone," said Anne. "Oh, I know it's most convenient, even more so than our old device of signaling to each other by flashes of candlelight. And, as Mrs. Rachel says, Avonlea must keep up with the procession, that's what." Anne goes on to relate the news that Gilbert has taken a job in Four Winds, and Diana moans that the 60 miles between Avonlea and Four Winds might as well be 600. As much love and support as Diana has provided for Anne over the years, we now know that Anne will have to forge ahead without her bosom friend in the next phase of her life. As beloved as Anne and Diana are to each other, their friendship lives in their girlhood, not their womanhood. Ragon, what do you think would have been different if Gilbert had been able to establish a medical practice in Avonlea?
Oh, good question. In some ways, it would be easier for her, yes. I'm sure she's thinking about it that way. Anne would have a built-in community and family available to help in easy reach. But, one of the things we see in these early chapters is how the smallness of Avonlea would make it hard for Anne to grow and establish herself as an adult. In one of these early chapters, some of the matrons of Avonlea, Mrs. Harmon Andrews and Mrs. Jasper Bell, come to call. And they come over and they kind of suck the wind out of Anne's sails. They're not meaning to be harsh, but this is just, they can't help but think of Anne as still that homely little orphan, and it shows. They're still kind of keeping Anne in her place, despite her BA and her success in Summerside. Mrs. Harmon Andrews even gets in a dig at her red hair. She also gets this zinger. "So Gilbert didn't go back on you after all," said Mrs. Harmon Andrews, contriving to convey an expression of surprise in her tone. "Well, the Blythes generally keep their word when they've once passed it, no matter what happens." I mean, come on.
Rude. You're just rude.
Mrs. Jasper Bell weighs in with this. Gilbert looks very young for a doctor. I'm afraid people won't have much confidence in him, said Mrs. Jasper Bell gloomily. Then she shut her mouth tightly, as if she had said what she considered it her duty to say, and held her conscience clear.
Woof. Woof. And these are like kindly women, right? Like Anne doesn't really
Yes.
begrudge them. This is just kind of that small town perspective.
Exactly. And this is a little bit of a callback, if you all remember, in Anne of the Island, just before she leaves for Redmond, there's a similar scene where Anne
Mhm.
ends up reporting later to Gilbert how dispirited she feels that everybody comes over and they're just full of all of these, I don't know, you might find out in Redmond that you're not as smart as you thought you were, or those little
Yeah.
things like that. And all of a sudden, Anne is feeling very young and provincial and out of place, and all her confidence gets sort of sucked away. And I think that this is kind of a good example of the cons of staying in a small town.
I think that this is showing why Anne and Gilbert have to leave, right? It is
Yes.
time for them to start fresh in a place where people might not know their whole history.
Well, and I think we talked about this a little bit when in Anne of the Island, we were talking about kind of the difference in her friendship with her college friends versus with Diana. Anne really holds her friendship with Diana, like she wants to preserve it in amber. She doesn't want it to change and doesn't quite know what to do with it. Whereas her college friends, because they're all meeting at college, they
Yeah,
don't know each other as little 11-year-old girls playing in the woods together. They can kind of meet each other where they're at. They're not bringing
right.
their past with them. And I think that's similar, right? If Anne and Gilbert had stayed in Avonlea, they'd always be having to fight against being seen as the youngsters, having to prove
Totally.
themselves over and over again, right? It's not that they have to reinvent themselves in Four Winds, but they don't have to constantly live down their childhoods either. And I think it's good for Anne as well, because Anne has always been afraid of change, right?
Yeah.
Green Gables in Avonlea was her first safe place after an unmoored childhood. I mean, listen to her talk about the phone. All of a sudden, she's like, the
Oh, I
what?
know. She really does. Yeah, her friendship with Diana, all these things, she wants things to stay exactly as they are, like in her memory.
And so I think it is as hard and as painful as it is to grow up and see the things that you loved in childhood change. We all need to experience that. We all have to see that, not just that we grow up, but that the places and the people around us also grow up.
If Mrs. Rachel can get on board with the phone, I think Anne can. Those first four chapters of Anne's House of Dreams are a reaffirmation of Anne's community connections and the joy she finds in them, right? All of Anne's friends get some little shout out and kind of a bit of an epilogue in these early chapters, right? We find out that Jane Andrews married a millionaire and got to tour Europe for her honeymoon. Anne's friend Priscilla won't be at the wedding because she married a dashingly handsome missionary and is now in Japan. Diana, of course, is a mother of two. One of them is named after Anne. Her former student, Paul Irving, is now 19 years old, all of 6 feet tall, and he's publishing his own stories. And we learned that Marilla and Mrs. Lynde are rubbing along fine at Green Gables, and Davy is going to take over the farm. Davy has grown up and can take over the farm now. It's amazing. Anne and Gilbert's wedding itself provides the perfect opportunity for the community of kindred spirits that Anne has cultivated over the years to come together in joy. And as soon as Anne and Gilbert leave Avonlea, there is the immediate contrast between being in a place where they are known and loved by so many and going to a new place where they are known by hardly anyone, especially for Anne, who meets Gilbert's aunt and uncle the night they arrive in Four Winds. So right away, there's this challenge for the newlyweds to make their place in this new village. For Anne, this is a new opportunity to make a home, something she's becoming very adept at. But for Gilbert, the stakes are quite a bit higher. He needs to establish not just connection within Four Winds, but professional respect, goodwill, and trust.
On their first night at the House of Dreams, Dr. Dave and Captain Jim give Gilbert and Anne some important intel about the folks who make up Four Winds and the surrounding town, Glen St. Mary. You haven't many neighbors, Mistress Blythe, Captain Jim went on. This side of the harbor is mighty thinly settled. Most of the land belongs to Mr. Howard up yonder past the glen, and he rents it out for pasture. The other side of the harbor now is thick with folks, especially the McAllisters. There's a whole colony of McAllisters. You can't throw a stone, but you hit one. I was talking to old Leon Blackier the other day. He's been working on the harbor all summer. They're nearly all McAllisters over there, he told me. There's Neil McAllister and Sandy McAllister and William McAllister and Alec McAllister and Angus McAllister, and I believe there's the Devil McAllister. There are nearly as many Elliots and Crawfords, says Dr. Dave after the laughter had subsided. You know, Gilbert, we folk on this side of Four Winds have an old saying, from the conceit of the Elliots, the pride of the McAllisters, and the vainglory of the Crawfords, good Lord deliver us.
The Devil McAllister.
But even more importantly, Captain Jim tells Anne about their immediate neighbors. Leslie, who he calls Mrs. Dickmore with a dismissive, and her husband for Dick himself, giving Anne the impression of kind of an overbearing busybody like Mrs. Rachel Lynde, whose own husband, Mr. Thomas Lynde, was definitely an afterthought. And Miss Cornelia of the vivid green house and scorn for men.
I think at this point in the text, readers of the Anne series thus far think they know what they're in for with this book, right? Anne is going to have some misunderstanding with the Mrs. Lynde like Mrs. Dickmore, and then eventually win her over. Anne will need to find a way to make the Elliots, the McAllisters, and the Crawfords like her and trust Gilbert. And Anne will also find friendship with the eccentric lady in the bright green house, maybe even changing her mind about men by setting up a perfect match. Maybe there will be a mix-up at a church bake sale, or Anne will find an adorable stray animal curled up in Gilbert's medical bag. In this version of the book, they'll be blessed with children right away, probably some harem-scarum twins right off the bat. I mean, that's sort of the trajectory of the Anne books we know and expect, right?
Absolutely. We've spent a lot of time discussing how this book takes our expectations and subverts them. Our cleverest character is an old sea captain with no formal schooling. The character who embodies goodness in her actions is spiteful in her words. The woman whose beauty and passion should have given her a fairy tale life is instead living out a Greek tragedy. Even the very structure of this book, we find ourselves again with our expectations subverted. House of Dreams isn't the book we think it's going to be. We're expecting another lighthearted Anne book about that irrepressible girl who wins everyone over. Instead, we get this book with all its intense tragedies and meditations on loss and suffering, questioning of God and the divine, its deeply philosophical wonderings about the very nature of grief and how to find joy and healing in the pain and uncertainty of life. On their first night in the House of Dreams, Captain Jim tells Anne and Gilbert the story of the first occupants of the house, the schoolmaster and his bride. In reflecting on the story now that we've spent so much time with this text, I'm realizing it's a near perfect metaphor for the emotional journeys in the book. John Selwyn, a sensitive, poetry-loving man from the old country, comes to Four Winds to teach at the Glen School. Selwyn is engaged, but his fiancée, Persis Lee, is back at home caring for her ill uncle. When her uncle passes away, Persis sends word that she will come and join Selwyn. Selwyn happily begins to ready the House of Dreams for Persis's arrival. But her ship is late, and everyone fears the worst. Selwyn is pacing the shoreline, waiting for her arrival. An enormous storm comes, and the morning after the storm, Selwyn tells a young Captain Jim that he has seen the ship that Persis is on in a dream, and she will be home by dawn. Do you think he did see it? Demanded Captain Jim abruptly. God knows, said Gilbert softly. Great love and great pain might compass we know not what marvels. I am sure he did see it, said Anne earnestly. Folderol, said Dr. Dave, spoke with less conviction than usual. Because you know, said Captain Jim solemnly, the Royal William came into Four Winds Harbor at daylight the next morning. Every soul in the glen and along the shore was at the old wharf to meet her. The schoolmaster had been watching there all night. How we cheered as she sailed up this channel. Encapsulated in the very first tale we hear about Four Winds is this theme that repeats again and again in the House of Dreams. It's a story of love that endures through crisis and fear, but ultimately hope is rewarded with great joy, not just for Selwyn, but for the whole of the Four Winds community. Every soul in the glen came to meet Persis Lee, and she and John Selwyn were married that very night, forever a part of the community that had borne witness to their love story. It's a sweet, romantic, nostalgic story, but it runs deeper than just that. There's divinity and mystery in it too. Selwyn's prophetic dream about seeing Persis Lee's ship come in, as if her arrival was preordained and nothing could stop it. And of course, Captain Jim's final coda to the story, that Persis and Selwyn lived in the House of Dreams for many happy years, and that the house itself is sort of soaked in the happiness of its occupants. As Gilbert wisely noted, great love and great pain might compass we know not what marvels. And this idea is proven again and again in this text.
We mentioned earlier that part of Anne and Gilbert's journey to community in this book specifically relates to the town accepting Gilbert as its physician. Now, he makes a strong showing in those early days when he saves a life. "I did good work last night, Anne," said Gilbert quietly. "Under God, I saved a life." This is the first time I could ever really claim that. In other cases, I may have helped, but Anne, if I had not stayed at Allenby's last night and fought death hand to hand, that woman would have died before morning. I tried an experiment that was certainly never tried in Four Winds before. I doubt if it was ever tried anywhere before outside a hospital. It was a new thing in Kingsport Hospital last winter. I could never have dared try it here if I had not been absolutely certain that there was no other chance. I risked it, and it succeeded. As a result, a good wife and mother is saved for long years of happiness and usefulness. As I drove home this morning while the sun was rising over the harbor, I thanked God that I had chosen the profession I did. I had fought a good fight and won. Think of it, Anne, won against the great destroyer. It's what I dreamed of doing long ago when we talked together of what we wanted to do in life. That dream of mine came true this morning. Oh, good job, Gilbert.
I'm so curious what the great experiment was. Having had multiple questions this season about the veracity of some of the
Right. The medical treatments in these books.
But good job, Gilbert.
We're happy your experimental medical procedure totally worked. Gilbert succeeds in saving his patient, and he has also earned the respect of the village. This is an important step to Gilbert and Anne taking their place in the Four Winds community. It looks pretty different from when they were the president and the secretary of the AVIS. Very few lives are on the line back then. But at this point in their story, these higher stakes do seem appropriate. Anne and Gilbert aren't kids anymore, and the story reflects that.
In discussing the emotional highs and lows of this book, perhaps the most dramatic example is, of course, in Leslie Moore's story. As Miss Cornelia tells Anne, "Poor Leslie, you wouldn't be much surprised if you knew what her life had been. It's been a tragedy, a tragedy." What Leslie has gone through is almost too much. It begins to take on a mythological quality, just like her famed beauty. She grows up poor, but she is well loved and adores her family. She sees her brother killed under a hay cart when he's 8 and she's 12. She's heartbroken, but as she is recovering from her grief, her father took his own life. Leslie's mother went to pieces, and Leslie, aged 14, became the de facto head of the household. And despite these great losses and immense responsibility, Leslie maintained her ambition. She went to Queen's Academy for a year, hoping to come home and teach at the Glen School to support her mother, perhaps even earn enough money to go to Redmond. When she came home, the brutish Dick Moore decided he wanted to marry her and told Leslie's mother he would call in the mortgage on their farm if she didn't accept his proposal. At Leslie's mother's insistence, Leslie married Dick Moore, who proved to be a terrible husband. The text hints that he was abusive to Leslie. A year into their marriage, Leslie's mother also died, leaving her 100% beholden to this bully. Leslie got a brief reprieve when Dick decided to go off to sea, and for a time he was thought lost at sea until Captain Jim found him in Cuba and brought him home, having suffered a brain injury that left him with the mental state of a child. Now Leslie is trapped into taking care of him. Miss Cornelia is the person who tells Anne this whole story, explaining, quote, "She's taking care of Dick, and she's never been away from him for 11 years. She's tied to that imbecile for life. And after all the dreams and hopes she once had, you can imagine what it has been like for her, Anne dearie, with her beauty and spirit and pride and cleverness. It's just been a living death."
Okay. When considering Leslie's story in the context of community, I think it's really notable how far removed the Four Winds community seems to be from Leslie. Miss Cornelia tells Anne and the reader that, "Lord dearie, everyone in Four Winds knows poor Leslie's story. It's no secret. The outside, that is. Nobody knows the inside but Leslie herself, and she doesn't take folks into her confidence." But I have to wonder, where are the people of Four Winds and the Glen in all of this? Why did no one show up for Leslie and her mother after her father died? Why did no one intervene when Dick Moore extorted Leslie into marrying him? Why does no one except Captain Jim and Miss Cornelia show up for Leslie now that she's in this role as caregiver to Dick? I mean, we've been talking a lot about how shared tragedy brings people together as a community. And the fact that no one seems to have shared in Leslie's tragedy means that she just really is going at this all alone. And I think in part this may be because Leslie herself does not solicit help and she doesn't complain, right? Miss Cornelia tells us that Leslie is deeply proud, and we understand that this pride stands between her and the people like Anne and Miss Cornelia who do want to get to know her better, who would want to help and support her, and who would be willing listeners to her complaints and her heartaches. And by refusing to seek help, Enduring tragedy after tragedy all alone, Leslie has closed herself off from community, and she suffers greatly from the lack of friendship and help. I think her hopelessness is at least in part due to her belief that she must do this by herself and that she cannot wish for anything different.
I think that's very true. And it seems like it's a huge change for Leslie. Remember that Miss Cornelia says that Leslie was the brightest and merriest of girls and that everyone loved her. I have a hard time believing that an entire community turned their backs on her. I wonder whether for some of it, it's Leslie protecting her mother or the memory of her mother. Surely she knows that other people would be blaming her mother for Leslie having to marry Dick Moore. Certainly Miss Cornelia is not afraid to say that she does. And Leslie even tells Anne that in her big confession speech. And maybe she was afraid of being talked out of that decision. Maybe it would be almost even harder to endure this if other people were also blaming her mother for it, right?
Children are often very protective of their parents, right? We
Yeah.
want to believe that the people who are taking care of us are making the right decisions.
And we know that Leslie is deeply loyal and holds doing her duty as a core value. It's easy to see how she would have pushed away anyone who might challenge that narrative. We also know that Miss Cornelia basically says that she had to force her friendship on Leslie. She just kept showing up and didn't mind how brusque and curt Leslie was. Others might not have had the time or energy or perseverance to keep showing up for Leslie and would have drifted away over time. We also know that one of the hallmarks of domestic abuse is separating the abused partner from their support networks. And whether or not that's something that actually happened in her marriage, we don't know, but it certainly could be a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then once Captain Jim brought Dick/George Moore home, Leslie's network had already dwindled away. And we know she was very embarrassed by the ways other people reacted to his childlike mannerisms. So the habit of retreat was probably already well established to fall back on. And it kind of reinforces itself, right? The more you pull away, the harder it is for people to reach you. The fewer people that reach out to you kind of reinforces for you that you are right to pull away. And it just becomes kind of a self-defeating spiral. And all of these factors kind of reinforce each other.
Yeah. I think that's right. And I think that asking for help and reaching out for community in that way, that is like a muscle that you have to exercise. And if you're not doing it, it feels impossible.
Yeah. And the first ask is very much the hardest.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want to just blame Leslie here, though, right? I mean, I think we do have some evidence that people in this community don't readily render assistance to those that they see as outsiders. I think of Miss Cornelia sewing for that unwanted eighth baby and how she seemed to be the only one in the world who cared about that poor little creature.
Well, from Miss Cornelia's point of view.
That's true. That's true. She was our potentially unreliable narrator there. But I do think it's interesting to consider what makes someone a valued member of the community, what makes someone worthy of respect and support in times of struggle, and what designates someone an outsider. And I think this might be a question we can answer better once we've reread some of the next books in the series, like Ingleside and Rainbow Valley and Rilla, and we have some more data about this town. But knowing Maud's sort of deep interest in insider versus outsider status in small towns, I'm wondering why Leslie in particular is seen as an outsider.
I think Leslie sees herself as an outsider now, that she doesn't have anything in common with the rest of the folks of Four Winds. She has both Captain Jim and Miss Cornelia vouching for her. And those are two people who are deeply connected in Glen St. Mary. I mean, between the two of them, they know everybody.
Yeah, truly.
I think if Leslie would let herself be open to it, she might find more support than she thinks is available.
Yeah. Captain Jim, of course, has his theory that the extreme depths of tragedies Leslie has suffered sort of prevents her from connecting with anyone who appears, at least, to be living a normal, happy life, someone like Anne. And we've discussed why we think Captain Jim's perspective here, wise as it is in some ways, may also be oversimplifying a complicated issue. But the fact remains that Leslie is so worn down by the circumstances of her life that she has lost all hope that she will ever find ease or contentment again. And in contrast, someone like Anne, who still has a hopeful outlook on the world, that just feels entirely alien to Leslie.
And I think it's very hard while you are still in the midst of tragedy, while you are barely keeping your head above water, so to speak, to be around people who are not also suffering. We even see that for Anne in the immediate wake of the loss of Joy. The text tells us, quote, kindly callers hurt her too, with the well-meant platitudes with which they strove to cover the nakedness of bereavement. Anne couldn't really connect with anyone else while she was drowning in grief, although she is able to eventually. And I was actually thinking here a little bit about the ways in which Leslie Moore and Catherine Brooke from Windy Poplars are both alike and different. And it is curious, Leslie Moore is written first, and then Catherine Brooke was written second, but chronologically in the story, Catherine Brooke came first. So, but in any case, you remember like Catherine Brooke told Anne, hate's got to be a disease with me. She kind of felt like the coping strategies she learned, the poor coping strategies really that she learned while dealing with so much when she was young, just they kind of calcified and she couldn't figure out how to stop it.
Yeah, couldn't break out of it.
Yeah. And I think that's similar for Leslie. Catherine Brooke wouldn't let herself connect to Anne or anyone else either because she felt like she was still living in the midst of her tragedy, kind of hemmed in by the financial circumstance in that case. And it was only once she was free financially from her past that she was able to allow herself to connect with Anne. And Catherine and Leslie both felt hopeless about their futures, both felt trapped by their circumstances, although Catherine was able to get to the place where she saw things could possibly change, at least in her outward circumstances. And in that way, they're very different from Anne, who for all her early losses in life wasn't yet old enough to feel trapped by them. Anne always had hope that things would change and that she could make change for herself. Once
And she
Catherine,
did. And she proved it to herself that she could do that.
yes. And once Catherine realized that change was possible, that she didn't have to be harnessed to her current path, her bitterness waned. At this point in the book, Leslie doesn't have any hope of her circumstances changing. So it's an even heavier lift for her to connect with Anne than it was for Catherine.
Yeah. Yeah. After Anne loses her baby, and very nearly loses her own life in delivering the baby, Leslie is able to begin to open up to her friend, who now knows loss on a similar level to what Leslie has experienced. Anne and Leslie, quote, were sitting among the blue-eyed grasses on the bank of the brook in Anne's garden. The water sparkled and crooned past them. The birches threw dappled shadows over them. Roses bloomed along the walks. The sun was beginning to be low, and the air was full of woven music. There was one music of the wind in the firs behind the house, and another of the waves on the bar, and still another from the distant bell of the church near where the wee white lady slept. Anne loved that bell, though it brought sorrowful thoughts now. This is the moment. A moment tinged with sorrow and with joy, the joy of a beautiful day and time spent with a dear friend, and of course, the sorrow of Anne's tragic loss. This is the moment when Leslie can finally admit to Anne that her resentment stood between them, and that Leslie has resolved to never let it do so again. We want to share these lines from the scene where Leslie and Anne are able to remove some of these barriers to their friendship, and I so wish we had our friend Kelly Taker here to help us do it justice. It's a really beautiful moment of connection between the two characters. All right, who do you want to be?
You be Leslie, I'll be Anne.
Okay. Leslie tells Anne, "Oh, Anne, I don't believe I'm jealous and envious by nature. When I was a girl, I lacked many things my schoolmates had, but I never cared. I never disliked them for it, but I seem to have grown so hateful."
Leslie, dearest, stop blaming yourself. You are not hateful or jealous or envious. The life you have to live has warped you a little, perhaps, but it would have ruined a nature less fine and noble than yours. I'm letting you tell me all this because I believe it's better for you to talk it out and rid your soul of it, but don't blame yourself anymore.
Well, I won't. I just wanted you to know me as I am. That time you told me of your darling hope for the spring was the worst of all, Anne. I shall never forgive myself for the way I behaved then. I repented it with tears. And I did put many a tender and loving thought of you into that little dress I made, but I might have known that anything I made could only be a shroud in the end.
Now, Leslie, that is bitter and morbid. Put such thoughts away. I was so glad when you brought the little dress. And since I had to lose little Joyce, I like to think that the dress she wore was the one you made for her when you let yourself love me.
Anne, do you know, I believe I shall always love you after this. I don't think I'll ever feel that dreadful way about you again. Talking it all out seems to have done away with it somehow. It's very strange, and I thought it so real and bitter. It's like opening the door of a dark room to show some hideous creature you've believed to be there, And when the light streams in, your monster turns out to have just been a shadow, vanishing when the light comes. It will never come between us again.
No, we are real friends now, Leslie, and I am very glad.
Oh, that light metaphor again, right? Opening the door and banishing the shadow monster with light. I'm just again reminded of the lighthouse, and it's just like these themes are throughout this book. Maud is doing this really interesting work of joy and sorrow, darkness and light.
Yeah. And I am reminded by that of why therapy is good, because this is what we do, right? By talking about it, because that's the thing that happens, right? Is that something painful happens and it seems like it is so difficult and painful. We have to hide it away and it's going to be too awful to ever talk about it because
Yeah.
we don't know what it will let out, right? We're
Yeah.
afraid that by talking about it, we're afraid that by acknowledging it, it will be too big, it will be too real. So we try and stuff it away, right? We become like Leslie. But when we let the light in and we talk about it, it
Yeah.
takes away the power of it.
Yeah.
Friends, consider it that your plug for therapy if you need it, because everyone deserves to let the light in. Well, once they are able to remove the obstacles to their friendship, Anne and Leslie are able to grow even closer. As we talked about in our last episode, they are great friends to each other in their shared grief. They can sit and hold space for each other on days when the sorrow is deep, and they're learning how to seize beautiful days together. With Owen and Gilbert, Anne and Leslie enjoy a summer of apparently nonstop joy. Honestly, it's a great list of things to do in the summer. Boating trips and picnics and berry picking, long walks in the summer sunshine and along the shore. And when Owen leaves in the fall, Leslie is able to confess to her friend that she has fallen in love with him. And in her thwarted love, once more, the book gives us an example of great happiness alongside terrible pain. Over the course of the book, Leslie's journey swings between extremes. She begins in despair, isolated, bitter, and alone. But Leslie finds her way to happiness, healing, and community. A lot of that seems to come with acknowledging her grief and frustration and limitations and permitting the Blythes, Captain Jim and Miss Cornelia, to offer her help and friendship. Whether it's opening up to Anne or allowing Captain Jim to look after Dick or consulting with Gilbert about Dick's treatment, Leslie's healing is a community event. Well, and some divine intervention or authorly interference is also required in the miraculous way that Dick, now George, was restored to mental acuity and Leslie is
Yeah.
set free. Soap opera plot twist.
Yep.
By the time the book ends, Leslie is in the bliss of her engagement to Owen Ford, with all the possibilities of a happy life open to her once again.
Captain Jim's narrative arc also embodies the same duality of sorrow and joy, perhaps not as dramatically as Leslie's. Although his life hasn't been characterized by loss the way Leslie's has, and outwardly Captain Jim projects contentment and warmth, we know that he has also experienced sadness in his past, his grief at the loss of Margaret, the love of his life. And even his story during the timeline of House of Dreams includes some regret. As our elder statesman, Captain Jim shows the younger characters in the book, and the readers, how to weather these crises and how to continue living and looking for joy, beauty, and friendship. You realize that, like, every time Captain Jim is on the page, he's commenting about how beautiful something is. Look at the beautiful sunset. What a beautiful walk up to your house. Look at the flowers in bloom in your gardens. I mean, he just soaks in beauty everywhere he goes.
Remember how he tells Anne that he's kind of gotten in the habit of looking for the good and he can't even get out of it.
Yes. Yes. I mean, speaking of therapy, that's like a therapy tool right there. A good therapist will teach you to like be in the habit of looking for good things. Once Anne and Gilbert befriend Captain Jim, they realize what a gifted storyteller he is. The Blythes are amazed by the life Captain Jim has led. Even the tiniest trinkets in his lighthouse carry with them some fabulous story of bravery and daring. He also shows them his life book, an old leather-bound journal of his wild adventures at sea. Captain Jim is casual about it, explaining that he just wrote down his stories so his little grandnephew would have them. But Anne sees the value in the tales immediately. She also notices that although Jim is a born storyteller, his gifts do not translate to the written word. There's really only an undercurrent of Captain Jim's frustration at not being able to write his life book the way he would have wanted. For a while, it seems like Anne is the character who's most troubled by it, honestly, and she's out here encouraging Paul Irving to come meet Captain Jim so he can write the book with him. But Paul is studying abroad and cannot come, and Anne is sorry to know that Captain Jim may yet pass on to the next world without ever writing the book that could properly capture his spirit.
I think for Captain Jim, the life book is really about leaving a legacy. He has no children or grandchildren of his own to kind of carry on his name. And he's recognizing that many of his old cronies are also dying and taking with them these shared memories. Even that the sailing life that he lived is now part of the bygone era.
Right, right. Yeah, the age of sail giving way to the age of steam.
Captain Jim wants to leave a little something of himself behind when he goes, as do most of us, I think.
Yeah.
When the writer Owen Ford comes to vacation at Four Winds, it seems, well, capital P providential. Not only is he a journalist in town for the summer and he's looking for a project of his own, but he is also the grandson of John and Persis Selwyn, Captain Jim's old friends who first lived in the House of Dreams. He kind of can't help but see a divine hand in this moment, and Captain Jim surely notices that as well. Here's what the text says. Won't you let Mr. Ford see your life book, Captain Jim? Asked Anne when Captain Jim finally declared that yarn spinning must end for the time. Oh, he don't want to be bothered with that, protested Captain Jim, who is secretly dying to show it. I should like nothing better to see it, Captain Boyd, said Owen. If it's half as wonderful as your tales, it will be worth seeing. With pretended reluctance, Captain Jim dug his life book out of his old chest and handed it to Owen. I reckon you won't care to wrestle along with my old hando, right? I never had much schooling, he observed carelessly. Just wrote that there to amuse my nephew Joe. He's always wanting stories. In this scene is where the reader can intuit some of Captain Jim's distress about not being able to do justice to his own life. He's falsely modest, but is also secretly dying to show Owen the book. But we know that Captain Jim takes a great deal of pride, not just in the book, but in the life he has lived. As discussed in our Captain Jim episode, he would have lived a singularly special life for his time in class, having seen so much of the world and being a captain of his own ship. He should be proud, and it makes sense that as his life is drawing to a close, he's looking back on that with a mixture of joy in his accomplishments and regret that he might not be remembered. When Owen agrees to take on the project of writing Captain Jim's life book, the reader understands that this is a dream come true for Captain Jim, to be memorialized and celebrated beyond what he was able to write, and beyond the stories he told to his nephew, or his listeners in Gilbert and Anne and Leslie. Even the process of writing the book alongside Owen is a source of tremendous joy for Captain Jim as he revisits his memories and reflects on his expeditions at sea. Maud tells us that Captain Jim, quote, was a happy man that summer. He looked upon the little room where Owen worked as a sacred shrine.
The writing of Captain Jim's life book, with all the joy that it brings to Captain Jim in the fulfillment of his secret hope, also brings the Blythes, Leslie, and Owen together as friends over the course of a summer that is deeply healing for Anne and Gilbert, who are still grieving for the loss of their daughter. And it also inspires a romantic spark between Leslie and Owen. Once again, we see how navigating these deeply emotional experiences together brings the little band of Four Winds kindred spirits closer together. Later that fall, after Owen Ford has finished the book, Captain Jim tells the Blythes and Miss Cornelia, "I'd a letter from Mr. Ford, Mr. Blythe, and he says the life book is accepted and is going to be published next fall. I felt fair uplifted when I got the news. To think I'm to see it in print at last." "That man is clean crazy on the subject of his life book," said Miss Cornelia compassionately. "For my part, I think there's far too many books in the world now."
She's talking to the wrong girls.
Miss Cornelia. But even with that quippy little retort, you know that she is pleased for her friend. The published life book arrived nearly a year later that following September. Quote, "Neither Anne nor Leslie ever forgot Captain Jim's face when they gave him the book. His book, transfigured and glorified. The cheeks that had been blanched of late suddenly flamed with the color of boyhood. His eyes glowed with all the fire of youth, but his hands trembled as he opened it." I love this idea that like just giving him the book imbues him with youthful energy, right? Like it kind of gives him his life energy back in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
To continue the passage, it was called simply The Life Book of Captain Jim, and on the title page, the names of Owen Ford and James Boyd were printed as collaborators. The frontispiece was a photograph of Captain Jim himself, standing at the door of the lighthouse looking across the gulf. Owen Ford had snapped him one day while the book was being written. Captain Jim had known this, but he had not known that the picture was to be in the book. "Just think of it," he said. The old sailor right there in a real printed book. This is the proudest day of my life. I'm like to bust, girls. There'll be no sleep for me tonight. I'll read my book clean through before sunup. This is the proudest day of Captain Jim's life, Reagan. The day that he gets this book in print. And it's the last day of his life.
Well, how fitting is that, right? This
Yeah,
book encapsulates his life, his entire experience,
yeah.
right? There's sort of a little bit of, well, I've done it all now. It's done.
I mean, I don't think you could ask for anything more than to have the last day of your life be your proudest day of your life.
Hmm.
Captain Jim stays up all night reading it, and Anne and Gilbert find him the next morning, having crossed the bar to the world beyond. His dream has come true. His legacy will be preserved. His lost love, Margaret, will be remembered. The grief of losing Jim is tempered with the joy of knowing that he has lived fully and will be remembered well. And not only with his life book, but also in his namesake, Anne Gilbert's son, whose life is beginning as Captain Jim's draws to a close.
So let's return to Anne and Gilbert. These 2 years at the House of Dreams, their honeymoon years together, these years are supposed to be the happiest of their whole lives. After years of waiting to be together, well, a handful for Anne, but probably about a decade for Gilbert, they're finally married and able to start their lives together. And at first, it's as idyllic as they could have wished, a cozy home and new friends, career success, lots of time to spend together uninterrupted. Honestly, it's everything we could wish for them. It's truly unparalleled joy and a dream come true. Anne's pregnancy is actually sort of living proof of that. It's a new dream for just the two of them to have together, building a family for themselves. But all marriages have to reckon with difficulties. A taste of bitterness comes for us all. And hopefully, that relationship will help us weather the bitterness together as a partnership. So the terrible pain of Joy's death is a test for their relationship in a way, and they weather it by leaning into each other and also opening themselves up to their friends and community. As tempting as it would have been to hole up and avoid all their well meaning friends and family, Anne and Gilbert stay open, stay connected. Anne chooses to receive Leslie's confession in the vulnerable spirit with which it was offered. She
Mhm.
allows herself to let her pain and loss be a path of connection between them, deepening their friendship instead of closing it off.
Hmm.
I almost wonder if watching Anne experience such pain was a powerful example for Leslie, because for all of Leslie's tragedy, she never lived inside of Anne's particular kind of loss. Anne could have easily shut the door on Leslie in the depths of her sorrow, but Anne didn't. She allowed Leslie to be there for her.
I think that's right, Reagan. And I almost see that thread, connection and sharing grief and sharing vulnerability. I almost see that thread as beginning with Captain Jim when he tells Anne the story of Lost Margaret, right? Because that's the next chapter after Anne loses baby Joy. He shares with her that great romance of his life that was cut short all too soon when Margaret was lost at sea. And Captain Jim tells Anne that although he mourned her loss profoundly, he scoured the shores for months in the hopes of finding her body, but eventually he found Margaret everywhere. He showed Anne that surviving a terrible loss almost means yielding to it in a way, not fighting it or trying to outrun grief, but accepting it and feeling it and finally making peace with memory. So he demonstrated that for Anne at a time when she needed to see that. And then Anne's later conversation with Leslie, she is able to do the same thing.
What comes next for Anne and Gilbert shows they are more deeply connected than ever in the aftermath of their shared loss. Even their disagreements about Dick Moore's medical treatment don't rock their foundation because they've already been through this terrible experience together. And when Jem is born, he is born to parents who have already been through sorrow together and now have even more appreciation for joy and for their future together. Anne is a mother who will never take for granted her children's health and their safe arrival on the planet. She will never take for granted her opportunity to mother her children as they grow.
Mm-hmm.
This loss is part of their family story, and we see Joy's memory become a blessing to Anne, just as Captain Jim predicted that it would.
Oof, right? This book is just packed to the brim full of these huge full circle moments. Birth and death, lives lived long and well, and lives cut short before they even start. There is the message that it is never too late for another beginning. It is never too late to embrace hope and joy And also that sorrow and bitterness is part of the human experiences. After reading this book, we are left with the idea that the most important thing is to find connection with others because we all need each other if we're going to get through it.
Today for the Birch Path, I wanted to talk a little bit about why, even with all this grief and loss, all of our characters are able to end the book in a hopeful and joyful place.
Yes, it's remarkable when you think about it, what these people deal with. And yet the book does end on a decidedly optimistic note.
And of course, we know that for plot reasons, Maud would not have left Anne in the depths of depression or Leslie lonely and miserable.
And
Those
thank
aren't,
you, Maud. Thank you.
exactly. Those aren't the kind of books she's writing. But she did show us some of the important factors for people to develop resilience. So I'm going to do a little, like, as Kelly says, my psychology professor hat on.
Oh, I
Although,
love Mental Health Corner. This is my
exactly.
favorite corner.
Mental health corner with Reagan Duffy, not a psychology professor, actually. I like that. Let's do our little mental health corner.
Yep.
So one of the things that we talk about in the mental health field is what are called protective factors. And that is internal and external circumstances that might help people weather loss or grief or help them avoid or come through mental health issues more easily. So generally speaking, the more protective factors someone has, the easier it might be for that person to be resilient and cope productively with grief or loss or trauma. Nothing makes people bulletproof. Of course, you can have everything on a list, and that doesn't mean that you won't be knocked over by grief.
Okay.
So Kelly's like, damn.
No, I truly was. I'm like, okay, I just need to check all the boxes and then I will never feel bad feelings.
Exactly. I hate to break it to you, but grief in response to loss is natural and it is important to feel. The idea is
will
not
hack my emotions.
yes, right? Like one weird trick.
Just this one weird trick, and you never have to feel emotions again.
You'll never have to be sad. Because the idea, of course, is not to protect someone from feeling difficult or distressing feelings, but to help someone move through it, adapt to it, overcome it, and come out the other side with hope. I'm going to list some protective factors. And of course, there's lots more than this, but this kind of encompasses a good representative list of some of the biggest protective factors. So I'm going to list some, and you are going to tell me which ones you think apply to Leslie or Captain Jim or Anne or all of them.
Awesome.
Okay. So here we go. We've got supportive relationships like friends and significant others, healthy coping strategies. That's a shout out for a therapist. A sense of purpose. Positive parenting by caring adults, emotional self-awareness, safe environments and stable finances, willingness to seek help, problem-solving skills, a sense of accomplishment or success at school or work, hope for the future, having goals, connectedness to others, cultural or religious beliefs that discourage suicide and support self-preservation, opportunities to contribute or participate in a larger community or school or work, a larger group than just you or your family. So what do you think, Cal?
Okay, well, right off the bat, I'm noticing how few of these Leslie has.
Yes.
Like very, very few. Maybe she had in her earliest life positive parenting by caring adults, but it does seem like that slipped away certainly after her father passed and her mother was unable to properly care for her. But no, she doesn't have hardly any of these things, right? She's not safe in her home. She's not financially stable. Dick is, we understand that he is sort of like a childlike mentality, but also that there's like some volatility there.
And if she was more financially stable for whatever reason, she might be able to afford help.
And because she's not financially stable, she can't do a lot of the other things on the list, right? She doesn't have those opportunities to contribute in a larger community. She doesn't have time to be connected to others or to seek help. And things like having goals or hope for the future, that doesn't even feel available to her because she really is just like surviving moment to moment to moment. So seeing how like few of these things Leslie has like really helps me understand how trapped she really was, not just by the circumstances, but also by her own beliefs around her circumstances.
And it really helps explain why her connection with Anne and developing a supportive friendship and a supportive relationship with her, feeling connected to Anne and Gilbert, that led to feeling more connected with Captain Jim and Miss Cornelia and all of those pieces, that now provides a new protective factor for her that she didn't
Yeah.
have prior to Anne and Gilbert living at Four Winds, right?
Right. Connectedness to others is a big one, and supportive relationships like friends and significant others. So like as she started developing those, some of the other protective factors could fall into place.
Yep,
And then in contrast, I mean, and maybe this is exactly what Maud is doing for us, Anne seems to have almost all of these things.
she does.
And we talk, of course, about the tragedy of Anne's early life, but by this point in this book, it's like check, looking down this list for Anne. She has supportive relationships like friends and significant others. I mean, she has this extremely beautifully supportive marriage with Gilbert. She has supportive relationships with all of her friends from college, from back in Avonlea. She's developing relationships with people in Four Winds. She makes great friends with Miss Cornelia and Captain Jim like within a week of getting there, so she
Mhm.
has that. She has a sense of purpose in making this place her home and in supporting Gilbert as his wife. She had an amazing example of positive parenting by caring adults in Marilla and Matthew.
Even if her early years didn't have enough of that, she
Yeah.
was able to have a corrective experience.
And you see how that is even something that is carrying through in this book in the way Marilla shows up for Anne for her pregnancy, for the loss of Joy, and then for the birth of Jem again. And like we kind of giggled a little bit about how Marilla does not exactly know how to say the right thing, but Anne knows that Marilla is there showing up with so much love, so much warmth, so much genuine care and protection. Why am I crying? I'm getting like so emotional just
Mhm.
thinking about like what a beautiful relationship they have in this book. Yeah, no, Anne has a lot of these things. A sense of accomplishment, success at school and work. She knows what she's good at. She knows she's smart. She knows she did all these things in the past and she's proud of herself. Hope for the future, her family she's going to have. Just everything. It's like check down the list for Anne. So you can
Yeah,
see how, although she's also weathering just absolute devastating loss in this book, she has cultivated greater resilience because of all of these protective factors.
exactly. And one of the things we learned from Leslie's story is how she started off life with many more of these. And as they gradually got whittled away, right, she had a loving relationship with her family, as certainly with her brother and her dad,
That
regardless of maybe her dad's ability to be a good provider. Leslie didn't seem to mind because the warmth and the love was there,
was there. Yeah.
right? She felt connected to her mother. She was connected to her grandmother, obviously. She also had a sense of accomplishment and a success. She had friends. She talks a little bit about how she used to have, friends at school and she
Right,
wasn't
right.
she wasn't jealous of them.
Yeah,
She
she
had
had good girlfriends.
exactly, she had goals for herself. She had opportunities she was looking for to participate in the larger community by being a teacher, all of those things. And as those
Mhm.
gradually got whittled away,
Yeah,
first her brother,
taken from her.
then her father, then her opportunities to participate, right? Her goals, all of those were
Mhm.
taken away as she had to marry Dick Moore. Then her mother, it makes sense how bitter she feels and how trapped she feels and how little
Yeah,
resilience she feels. Like there's a brittleness to Leslie that she could snap to pieces because, resilience, when we think about resilience, it's this ability to bounce back.
right,
And each of the things that Leslie has experienced has taken more and more of these protective factors away. Whereas Anne has had the opposite experience.
right.
And as
She's
she's gone through life, she's added more and more.
Yeah, again, Maud is doing that really interesting inverse work with these two characters, right?
Hmm.
Leslie with the happy early childhood and the tragedy late in life, and with that reverse experience. And you even see it in this exact way, right? Leslie losing these protective factors while Anne is gaining them at the same time. Yeah, really, really beautiful symmetry there.
Any things kind of resonate for you around Captain Jim?
Okay. It's so interesting because we don't know that much about Jim's early life, but I would say that he has a lot of these as well. Strong sense of purpose and opportunity to contribute and participate in larger communities.
This man is
Clearly,
connected.
yeah, you can tell he's lived a life deeply, deeply in community with people.
Every story that he tells often involves some kind of connection to other people. The story of the
Mhm.
schoolmaster and his bride is a great example because not only is it the story, it's meaningful to Jim because he had such a personal relationship with the schoolmaster. The schoolmaster
Right.
was a mentor for him. And that was a powerful relationship. And that's why that story resonates so deeply.
These are also the sort of episodes that make up the wisdom he's accumulated over the course of his life. He rightfully has a great sense of accomplishment with that. And that sense of accomplishment is also a protective factor. He's proud of himself. He's proud of the life he's lived. And I mean, maybe this is why, or maybe this is among the reasons why Captain Jim is entering this transitional phase, leaving this world for whatever comes next, in such a state of peace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we even see in the way that he frames his spiritual beliefs, there's a serenity for him in his beliefs, a trust, a feeling that it will all work out, even if he doesn't know exactly what happens next.
He's sure that he will be reunited with Margaret. So whatever comes next, he knows that that will be part of it. And that, I think, is giving him hope for the future, right?
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really struck me as kind of we're talking a little bit about this is that theme of connectedness. We know that that's one of the primary protective factors. That just goes to show, I think, what Maud is often talking about is how it's our relationships with each other that give us meaning, that save us, that help us through all of the difficult experiences in our life and give us a sense of purpose.
Yeah. Ragon, this was a very profound mental health corner.
The more you know.
There is so much wisdom in these books.
Mm-hmm.
Well, before we end our discussion of this beautiful, beautiful book, let's do one last puffed sleeve segment. I know one thing I really wanted to find a way to talk about at some point in our discussions, and I just couldn't figure out the right way to bring it up, is how in Anne's House of Dreams, the sea itself is such a prominent metaphor. We are told that she can see the ocean from every single room of the House of Dreams. And so it becomes a huge part of her life. She talks about how in Avonlea, even though she lived near the ocean, it wasn't really the same. She wasn't in view of it all day, every day, like she is here. And we know that Anne is super sensitive to the natural world. So she notices those sort of shifts in the sea. Sometimes it's stormy, sometimes it's serene. And over, we see Maud using the sea to describe someone's state of being. You know, on the night after a wild storm, we meet Leslie on the beach. Her mind is full of tumult. And on the morning of Captain Jim's death, the sea is calm and shining and almost smiling as it welcomes the old seafarer home. So if you ever want to know how the people in this book are feeling in any given moment, you need only look for the closest reference to the sea.
Oh, I love that. Well, a puffed sleeve moment for me is all the callbacks in this book to the previous Anne books. I love a full circle moment. I love how we check in on other characters at the beginning of the book, as we talked about. And even at the end of the book, we kind of wind up in the last couple of chapters with some letters from Green Gables, with some other little callbacks. We find out that Dora, little Dora, is 17 now and has a beau. And her beau is, talk about the symmetry, it's Ralph Andrews, Jane's little brother.
Oh my gosh, little Dora and little Ralph.
Anne even references her first unromantic proposal, saying, quote, well, if she marries Ralph, I hope he will be a little more up and coming than his brother Billy. Anne is horrified that Dora is old enough for a beau at 17. Gilbert reminds her that both he and Charlie Sloane were head over heels about Anne when they were 17.
Yeah.
I just love this full circle nature of this book, that despite the tragedy and sadness in it, it feels very complete. If the Anne books had ended here, it would have been a satisfying ending, I think. I mean, I'm glad it didn't. I love the other books too, but I think as we have done this deep dive, this really feels like a satisfying moment to sort of wind up Anne's growth arc.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, let's move in to a little inspired by Anne and inspired by the House of Dreams. So I'm going to say, I really love the theme in this book of creating community and kind of developing your own family and found family. And so I have two books to recommend that have a similar theme. So one is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. Oh, love this book.
Yeah.
This is a cozy, beautiful fantasy about a lonely caseworker for magical children who goes out to assess a group home full of dangerously powerful children and their guardian. and he finds the family that he didn't know he was missing. It's so, so beautiful and perfect and will give you all the warm feelings, and also you'll probably cry.
Oh, I kind of want to reread this book again now, thinking about how good it is.
Another book along that same vein is The Very Secret Society for Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. So also in this book, we have magical children and secrets and found family and love and finding belonging in places you might not expect. And it features a witch named Mika Moon, which is just the most perfect name.
Reagan, I love both those books.
Those are good books.
Yes.
Lovely, feel good books. They feel deep, but like warm at the same time.
I think that if you are looking for a House of Dreams read alike, those are both great recommendations because you get warmth and community, but there is also kind of no shortage of deep emotional resonance.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm inspired by your idea of found families. So I will recommend some of my favorite found family trope books. Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher is a fantasy road trip fairy tale quest kind of book in which a princess sets out to save her sister from a terrible husband. And she rounds up a little party of oddballs, including a witch, a reluctant fairy godmother, a disgraced former knight, a chicken possessed by a demon, and a dog made of bones to go save her sister. And we actually can't talk about Bone Dog too much because I love him more than it is reasonable to love a fictional dog. But Nettle and Bone is witty and fun and a little off kilter and fantastical in all the best ways. I mean, it's a great read. And finally, another found family book that I think the kindred spirits will adore, especially if Captain Jim has inspired you for some high seas hijinks, is The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by S.A. Chakrabarty. Amina is everything. I adore this character. She's a middle-aged woman. She's a former pirate captain who is now enjoying a quiet retirement and living in hiding with her young daughter. A mysterious woman approaches her with an offer she can't refuse. So Amina decides she's up for one last score. She rounds up her old crew in like an Ocean's 11 style montage because, of course,
Yes.
them is like bringing some incredibly cool power or talent or skill to the table. And together they all go off on this like swashbuckling seafaring adventure. I mean, it's just a blast. It's a perfect vacation read. It's so good.
Well, kindred spirits, thank you so much for joining us as we wrapped up our exploration of Anne's House of Dreams. Our season's not over yet, so please join us next time as we do something a little different, and we're going to talk about our upcoming plans to visit Prince Edward Island. We would love it if you would continue to share the podcast with the kindred spirits in your life. Let us know if you've reviewed the podcast on Apple Podcasts or if you've shared about us on social media, and we will send you our high-quality vinyl KSBC sticker for free. Reach out and let us know how you shared the pod via email at kindredspirits.bookclub@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at kindredspirits.bookclub. Be sure to give us a follow on Instagram while you're there. We're always posting fun bookish content. We're on Instagram pretty regularly, so it's a great way to interact and get recommendations and see pictures of my ever-growing collections of Anne books. Thank you for listening and join us next time.
Thank you, kindred spirits.